those in charge of the Indian cricket team coming up with a 10-point set of guidelines for international cricketers to follow. Well, I've been catching up with the broadcaster and former cricketer Sohail Chandok to find out exactly what's been going on.
I think it's safe to say there is some sense of disharmony. Like I said, I used the word turmoil earlier because it seemed to be such a stable side. I think India was the unbeatable force over the last few years in every format. England were over. I worked on that Test series here where I hate to remind you, it was a 4-1 drubbing, if I may say so, in India. And it was an amazing series, a lot of sportsman spirit. The team seemed to just be coming together so well under Rohit Sharma, who's such a loved character, I think, in amongst the players as well. So to see the complete U-turn over the course of just one series in Australia, and albeit in very difficult conditions for a young team that's touring, I think we've kind of gotten ahead of ourselves, seen some crazy things happen in the last tour of Australia, and maybe gotten away with that as well. So the expectations being so high on what is essentially a young Indian unit, I think it's now become about how much excess baggage you can carry, the duration that wives and girlfriends can stay, who's going to be traveling by what airline, and whether everyone's going to stay in training together. Now, look, I think a lot of this actually needed to happen a lot long ago, but given that things were allowed to move a certain direction, it's now suddenly completely gone into a U-turn of domestic cricket versus non-domestic cricket, and a whole lot more. So I'm sure we'll dive into a few nitty-gritties as well.
Yeah, we will. Like you said, this all stems from that 3-1 series defeat to Australia in the Border Gavaskar Trophy. Having won the first test as well, it all looked like it was setting up for a good stage for for India, I should say. But Australia came through to win in the end, as I've mentioned. That came about after the New Zealand defeat at home for India, which was a 3-0 whitewash. And now we've had this review that you've sort of touched on there by the Board of Control of Cricket in India, which has set out these new 10-point guidelines. Some might look at these sort of new ideas, these new stances that they brought in as maybe a bit of an overreaction. But some of the things that they've asked for example, is, as you say, players should not travel separately. They cannot leave practice sessions or tours early, and contracted players have to play domestic cricket. There's also a limit, and you sort of touched on it earlier on, with the wives and girlfriends and families on how long they can visit a touring India party, for example. Is it an overreaction, or is this needed?
Look, I think some of it was needed earlier itself. I think this is a bit of a knee-jerk reaction given the 10-point sort of bullets. But I played a lot of cricket in Australia for about 5 years, and a lot of guys who were playing for Australia back then were still playing A-grade cricket, right? I think when you now think back to what Rohit Sharma and Virat Kohli have done, I don't think Virat's played a domestic game in about 10 years, if I'm not mistaken. I think Rohit Sharma pretty similar. So I don't think there's a lot that's wrong about that. I think the cohesiveness in terms of turning up to training at the same time, leaving at the same time. I mean, for most teams, these are pretty much a given. And, I think, most teams would look at this and say, hang on, why was it not there in the first place? And I think there is a lot of head scratching going on from people I've spoken to, from people outside of India that have called me and said, so what is actually going on? Because were they staying in separate hotels earlier? Was a certain player not allowed to train separately? So suddenly now it's all brought to light, things that were perhaps going on but weren't necessarily needed to be publicly revealed. So I think it's now brought a lot of stuff under the scanner that should just remain within the team unit. And you know what it's like when a paper has been leaked, or a team meeting's been leaked. It happens during the Ashes famously as well. It causes a bit of a rift within the team. And I think this is just a bit of poor timing in terms of all of it coming together, because it also makes it seem like more of a knee-jerk reaction, even though I think a lot of these processes are for the right reason, playing Ranji Trophy cricket, giving a bit more credence to domestic cricket and things like that. So yes and no in terms of knee-jerk versus needed. But yeah, look, I think there's a lot to digest, that's all.
Is there, though, a superstar culture then in the Indian cricket team? Is it a them and us scenario that perhaps we haven't all been privy to?
I think there is. Look, I'd be lying if I said there isn't, and I think everyone knows it. There are certain characters of the team that bind a team together, though, and I think Rohit Sharma is at the helm of that. Everyone I've spoken to through that Test series, before that, after that, I've worked on the IPL now for close to a decade, thankfully, and seen the reason why Rohit has won as many IPL titles as he has, the reason why he's led a team to a T20 World Cup trophy, test matches. And whenever you talk to the younger players, they always say, Rohit Bhai always makes us express ourselves. He really brings us in together. And I think there's a sense of togetherness under Rohit Sharma. So while India as such is a superstar chasing culture, and I don't mean just from a cricket perspective, right? There's a reason why cricket and Bollywood rule India in many ways. India longed for heroes, longed for icons. And I keep saying we've got a long way to go before we become a true sporting nation, because quite often we don't go to watch sport, we go to watch the sporting icons. And therefore, there is this hero culture that we're chasing. So, and I think when you've lived on a pedestal for that long, when you are also trying to shy away from the public eye, it's hard. It's a hard life to constantly be chased by paparazzi or chased by fans and people literally wanting to touch you and get a feel of a Virat Kohli or a Rohit Sharma. So, look, a lot of this comes down to bringing parity back and putting everyone on the same stature as such, and kind of making sure that a guy who's playing his first ODI or first T20 feels, at least in the dressing room, like he's the same as a guy who's played 2 World Cups or 4 World Cups.
It'll be great to get your reaction then to what has emerged from that defeat to Australia, stemming also from the New Zealand defeat at home for India. These guidelines that they've put in place, I mean, I was reading through them and I found them absolutely fascinating, because the whole way through I kept thinking, how have they allowed this to happen? Why have they got to this stage where players previously were traveling separately to tours or to venues, for example? I mean, it just, there's no team ethic there if you're allowing players to do that. Some players are allowed to leave practice sessions early, for example. There are some that we can debate whether or not they seem fair, but just those first 2 points, and I still scratch my head as to thinking how they've allowed that to happen. Maybe it's because, Kate, they have a superstar culture within the Indian team where there are some that are just these heroes that have been allowed to get away with this behavior.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible, isn't it? I mean, I was reading these guidelines, I had exactly the same reaction as you. Get on the team bus, travel with the team, don't leave practice early. This sounds just like what every other team would be doing. And the Indian cricket, I mean, they're paid multi-millions of dollars. If they're not getting on the team bus and they're leaving practice early, what are we paying them for? One of the others I found really interesting was you can't bring your own personal staff with you, because what you're bringing a masseuse, they're not enough there's probably a few physios, right? Maybe one less massage in a day on your travel team. Yeah, it's crazy. And if that's not already happening, absolutely, it's going to cause culture problems. And I think that is, you've hit the nail on the head, Nat. If you've got the stars that are bigger than the team, that's when things break down, especially in a team like cricket, where everyone has to be out there for such long days and getting along. Hopefully, they're on tours that go for months on end. It's clearly something's breaking down there, and people leaving practice early. Come on. I mean, get with the program. It's 2025 now. And we need to be acting like professionals that are being paid multi-millions of dollars.
Can I say this and just add the Kobe Bryant quote on that? There is no INT, but there is an ME. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the players there are starting to lead on the ME. I think it just goes back to kind of what Kate was saying. This will tear down a team. I think in the NFL, they talk about building a culture. And it's a culture of team, which Kansas City has done. It's a culture of team, the team before me. And you start to get these little inroads of people saying, I'm kind of bigger than the team. I need this, I need this. And that's where the crumbling starts.
I mean, Kate, you also touched on it, that some of these tours are ridiculously long. I think cricketers are away from home much more often than they are at home when it comes to the international stars. You're talking months, as you say, as well. And they've said that for tours longer than 45 days, families are allowed to visit for only 2 weeks of that tour. Now, there's a part of me that think some of these guidelines were a little over the top, because there are some players that might need to have their families around. Now, we've got to accept that some players are professional enough to do the job at hand, but also can see their families and have the distractions as long as they perform their duties. So they're turning up for training, they're doing their media duties, they're doing all the team talks, etc. I think sort of banning the families for a lengthy period of time might be a little harsh. And also, if I was one of those family members, I'd be thinking, don't be blaming me. You didn't lose this series because I turned up, for example. But the other good thing I did think was, though, one of the guidelines is saying that the international players should be competing in the domestic cup competitions, and in particular the Ranji Trophy. And I think that's always a good thing anyway, when you can have some of the younger players coming through, playing alongside the likes of Virat Kohli and Rohit Sharma and Jasprit Bumrah, for example. That's only going to help strengthen the Indian team in the long run, you'd like to think. I did question, and as I say, you can hear more of this on our YouTube channel, I did question Sohail about the standard of the Ranji Trophy and whether that's good enough for those international players to play in. Are they going to benefit themselves from that? But it still makes sense to me that you should be required to play a minimum amount. There were talks of, if they don't follow these guidelines, there'll be bans in place and they might be banned from playing in the IPL. I'm not sure they'll ever get to that stage, because I think, how can you really cut some of those star players from the IPL? But interesting nonetheless, they've gone down this route. It does seem as though they've gone nuclear on this one.
Yeah, and I think I always come back to the good teams that are doing it right and winning a lot, okay? So I just think of like the New Zealand rugby team, the All Blacks. There's a video of them on Instagram just recently. It came up on my feed again and reminded me, one of the things they would always do is sweep out the locker rooms once they were done, wherever they were. Maybe they'd won the World Cup, whatever they were doing, they would be sweeping out the locker room, not leaving it to any of the cleaners. Nothing was beneath them. And so that we, not me mentality really came through, and it was clearly part of their whole thing and really part of their success. And I think that's a theme in every team that's very successful over a long period of time. It's a we, not me attitude. And I think about, the Patriots, they would have had that. Tom Brady was never bigger than the team. It's a whole range of examples. And when players become bigger than the team, like it seems to be happening, that's toxic, and the culture really needs to be shifted in the Indian cricket.